Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Gaur Pramanand Haribo. So, Pranam to all of you. Good morning from North Carolina. And all of you, welcome to our last meeting of our series of lectures about Vaisnava etiquette, rules and love in the life of a sadhaka. Today we are in meeting number 19, and after almost, I will say, 3 months or 2 months or something, we are reaching the end, quote unquote, end of all that we can say, or some of we can say about this concept of Maryat or Vaishnav decorum. So today in our last meeting we will be sharing some various topics which were somehow or other not able to be fit into some of the daily schedule dynamics that we have been sharing in our last weeks, and also some brief conclusion to the whole series for sure. But as usual, let's begin with a brief summary of what we saw during last Thursday, where we were sharing some words about prasad. And as usual, we began with some conceptual orientation of that, the principle of prasadana is not different from Bhagavan. In this case, prasad, of course, means grace, but also especially extending to the conception of sacred foodstuff, if you will, as a form of Bhagavan's grace. So in the same way that Bhagavan is not different from the deity, that Bhagavan is not different from Srinam, that Bhagavan is not different from the Bhagavad, we could establish some connection, absolute type of connection between Bhagavan and his extended grace, and in this case, in the form of prasad. So to learn how to honor prasad is a whole art, as Siddhar Maharaj will say. To solve how we eat will solve everything else, since the eating is the most immediate, instinctive self-preservation impulse we may have here. So if we solve how to do that in the context of dedication, well, that will really affect all our other movements in this world. So all in this connection is that we say honoring prasad or prasad sevaya, rendering seva to prasad, to Bhagavan's grace, and not so much taking prasad, eating prasad, but trying mostly to concentrate on what has been the experience of Krishna with having prasad, when receiving what we have offered to him. And we shared the famous example of Sriman Mahaprabhu tasting Jagannath saliva in Jagannath Puri when honoring Jagannath Prasad. So the main point here is we are not so much interested in ourselves being the center of the experience and how does this taste to me, but how this has tasted for Bhagavan and how can I serve that experience. Of course, prasad, again, as we mentioned, doesn't only limit to sacred foodstuff. We can extend the idea of clothes wearing the remnants of the Vaishnavas that has been offering to Bhagavan, so many forms of grace. But in connection to prasad as sacred foodstuffs, we also mentioned that there are degrees of prasad, there are levels of states of consciousness that will make for different types of prasad. Four main considerations we shared in that connection: the state of consciousness that the one who is cooking will have, the one who is offering, the one who is serving, and the one who is receiving, honoring prasad. So if all this is in place, we can speak about the full range, full-fledged experience of prasad seva. So we also expanded a little bit on these four, especially concentrating on the importance of honoring all these stages as a very sacred practice. For example, serving prasad, this is not something ordinary. Again, serving prasad means giving Krishna's grace, extending the mercy of Bhagavan to others. So generally, the idea is Elder Vaishnavas will be doing that. We can give Bhagavan's grace to ourselves. At least that's the gist of the idea. Of course, in practical terms, we may have to serve prasad to ourselves because there's no one else, but you have to get the idea behind that. Again, not get neurotic with the do's and don'ts in an external sense, but try to get to the mood and to the bhava behind that. So how to avoid Apparat regarding prasad, that's important, how to address this sacred principle from, again, a dedicated spirit. Then we share some more practical tips in connection to prasad regarding cooking, cleanliness in the kitchen, how to consider the kitchen as non-different from the altar, Sri Radha's place, official place where she is so dedicated for Krishna's pleasure, how to be clean ourselves, how to clean while we are cooking, different prayers that we can offer before honoring prasad, trying to further invoke this sacred perspective on what we are about to do, trying to not abuse the principle of mercy in the form of prasad, not eating more than required, not using prasad for the satisfaction of our tongue or belly, but mostly for honoring as a divine descent, trying to properly clean everything, as we mentioned, pots, plates, tables, trying to, again, all this has to do with, in one sense, we may say sattva, but sattva, again, is something that will foster properly, by properly embraced, the principle of transcendence. Ideally, we should not leave remnants. We should eat everything that we receive and not ask more than we can honor. But we can accept the remnants of the Vaishnavas. That's an important point. We speak about prasad, or sometimes it's called Mahaprasad, great grace. But when we speak about the remnants of Vaishnavas, we will call it Mahaprasad, great grace. When that comes from especially exalted practitioners, we will do our best to try to honor that. We spoke about that. These three substances, very powerful. The dust from the feet of the Vaishnava, the water that has washed the feet of the Vaishnavas, and the remnants of their foodstuff. Also, we share some order of serving preparations according more to cultural and specific geographical sensibilities. Desha Kalapatra, again, this is not something to absolutize, if you will, but just a detail to consider. The idea of offering Krishna that what he likes the most, or at least to begin with, what we like the most, so we can connect our own taste with Krishna's taste, make him part of the plan, and eventually become more and more concerned with Krishna's own taste, which ultimately, beyond particular preparations, his diet is based on bhakti, as we mentioned. We share some ideas also on the principle of dairy products, ahimsa dairy products, veganism, and how to try to conceive that from the Gaudiya perspective. Also, we spoke a little bit about the Ekadasi, to how to understand Ekadasi from different levels of conception, upavas, day for getting closer, residing near, closer to our Istadev. And we finished our lecture by sharing also one nice story from Vrindavan, and from Sirodakasai Vishnu Maharaj, when his dog died, and he organized this Tirubab Mahotsav, and all the Brajavasi dogs came there, and very special experience in the context of honoring prasad. So we see the potential of how a moment like honoring prasad can become such a portal, if you will, to transcendence. So that's it. Today we will finish our series, as I mentioned, with some different miscellaneous various topics that somehow or other, some of them were asked by private message, most of them I already had in mind. So this may not be so conceptual in one specific line, as I mentioned, but we will touch here and there, of course, trying to connect and see everything in the greater picture of Vaisnava etiquette, Maryat, proper behavior, which ornaments the life of the sadhaka. So again, all this did not fit fully in the daily schedule we have been sharing, but still are quite interesting and important. So let me begin with sharing some ideas regarding the concept of dham, aparat, or actually dham, how to reside in the dham. When we visit the dham, for us Gaudiyas, we have different places. Dham means, in this case, the personal realm of Bhagavan, that for us Gaudiyas, we will mainly speak in terms of Vrindavan Dham, Navadvip Dham, Jagannath Puri Dham. These are the three main realms, if you will, in connection to our particular tradition. And also there's a list of things to avoid while being there, and of course, indirectly, again, implying what to do being there. So that's an important part of our practice, an interesting experience, going to visit the Dham, Parikram, in the context of the company of sadhus and so on. Of course, in brief, the important thing when visiting Dham, the most essential thing, in the same way that when worshiping Srimurti and so on, will be trying to approach the experience through the lens of bhakti. That means to the lens of bhakta, to the lens of the love that the sadhus have in their hearts. And through that, we can really enter, access Sri Dham. I remember once I asked my Guru Maharaj some years ago, Guru Maharaj, do you plan to go to Vrindavan soon? Because last time he went there was 2007. So he told me, I'm quite engaged now in trying to establish the Dham outside the Dham, something like this, to develop certain embassies where the very essence of the Dham is being perceived along different communities. So I really appreciated the idea. As we know, when Prabhupada went out of Vrindavan, some people were asking him why he was going out of Vrindavan. Those who were asking him were not living actually in Vrindavan. They didn't realize he was expanding the Dham. So that said, of course, at the same time, it's nonetheless a very nice experience to visit the Dham, properly speaking. But of course, taking the hands of the sadhus, who are the tirtha, the sacred spot personified. And this is stated in many places, in famous word, for example, in the Bhagavad, where it is say, Bhagavad Bhavad Vida Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Vibhu Tirthi Kurbhamti Tirthani Santastena Gadabritaha. So the Yudhishthira is speaking to Vidura. When Vidura is saying, I'm going on pilgrimage. So Yudhishthira chuckles and say, Vidura, devotees like you, sorry, devotees like your good self, he says, are barely holy places personified. You carry Bhagavan in your heart, and because of that, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. Tirthi Kurbanti Tirthani. You are Tirtha Bhutta Swayam. You are the very personification of a Tirtha. So that's important, because if not, that can become only tourism or something like that. That we are interested in having the real experience of what's the mood of the eternal inhabitants of those dhams. So for that, we go through the lens and the hands of Guru Sadhu. Also, the Bhagavatam, another famous verse that I would like to share regarding conceptual orientation, says, Yasyatma buddhi kunape tridatuke sadikalatradi subhoma ijedi yat tirtha buddhi salilena karhijit janesu viknesu saiva gokara. Which means one who identifies himself as the inert body composed of mucus, bile, and air, who assumes his wife and family as are permanently his own, who thinks an earthen image or the land of his birth is worshipable, or who sees a place of pilgrimage as merely the water there, but who never identifies himself with, feels kinship with, worships, or even visits those who are wise in spiritual wisdom, such a person is no better than a cow or an ass. This is a famous verse from 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, which speaking, someone who identifies with his body, try to follow the parallel, and then he says, but who never identifies with the sadhus, or that person who assumes his wives and family are their own, but never feels kinship with the sadhus, those who thinks an earthen image or the land of his birth is worshipable, but they are not worshiping the sadhus, or those who go to see a place of pilgrimage as the water, but do not even visit the sadhus in those places of pilgrimage, Bhagavatam says, they're no better than cow and an ass. So the important thing, if we go to the Dham, through the hand of the sadhu, to visit the sadhus there, not just to travel and visit places, basically, and take pictures, if you will. But of course, that said, there are famous list of 10 Dham apparats, don'ts, in the context of visiting Sri Dham. So I will share them briefly, and we will continue with other topics. But we will see how all these are quite connected, or some of them, to this principle that I've just said. The very first one says to dismiss or to lack respect in connection to Sri Guru, who is the one who reveals the holy Dham to us. So that's what I have been saying now. To not properly honor the principle of the sadhu, through which we can really enter the Dham. Second is to think that Sri Dham is temporary, which is just a geographical place in this world, which actually represents the Dham, represents an eternal destiny. It's our eternal destiny manifesting on earth in the form of Vrindavan, Navadvip mainly in this case. Another apparat in the dam, sorry, another apparat connected to Sri Dam is to engage in violence to the different residents of the dam, or with some pilgrim that were maybe in the dam, be it human, animal, or to consider them as ordinary people. Someone is living in the dam, was born in the dam, has the fortune to reside there somehow or other. That's important to appreciate. And even if we find something that may not fit too much between our ears, we may take some respectful distance, but we shall still honor those personalities. Another apparat, the fourth one, is to engage in mundane activities while residing in Sri Dam. If you go to the dam, is of course to try to absorb yourself in bhakti, in sadhana. So if knowing that you still continue with mundane actions, that will be apparat. Another apparat will be to make a business with the worship of the deity or with the chanting of Trinam in the context of the Dham and outside of the Dham as well, because it's connected with the principle of Sri Dham. The sixth offense is to think that Sri Dham belongs to a country or to a particular state or province like Bengal or Uttar Pradesh or whatever, or think like the Dham of Bhagavan is similar to any other holy place related to some deva, or also it is offensive trying to measure the Dham. Even though we may hear this is 84 crosses and this kind of miles and kilometers, but actually, strictly speaking, the Dham is composed of Chinmay Dham, no? Vaikuntara Prithivyadi Sakal Chinmay, transcendental substance. It, although appears measurable to our eyes, we should understand it's beyond that. Another offense is to engage in sinful activities while staying in Dham, in Sri Dham, which is similar to engage in mundane activities. There may be some degrees of how adharmic may be that behavior. Another offense, interestingly, is to consider that Vrindavan and Navadvip are different. That's an important, interesting point in our particular tradition. That to consider that Vrindavan and Navadvip are different basically means you have to understand how these two destinies correspond with a particular equal goal that expresses, of course, in two bhavs, as we know, Madhurya, intimacy, sweetness of Raj, and Audarya, Nadia. But basically, as Krishna and Gaur Krishna, as we spoke yesterday, are non different. They have particular different mood, but at the same time, we are speaking about the same reality, an extension, one reality of the other. So it's important to, as my Guru Maharaj said yesterday, one can speak about that in theory, understand Mahaprabhu is Krishna, but to really get to that insight and feel how Mahaprabhu is not different from Krishna himself, but Krishna in a special moment, and extend that idea to their dhams, because one thing goes hand by hand with the other, that may require some epiphany, some practice, but it's important to get to those points. The ninth Dhamma Parad is to blaspheme, to criticize against the Shastras which glorify Sri Dham. All different scriptures that sing the glorious praise, all the attributes, transcendence of the Dham. It's important to properly honor them. Through them, we get to access Sri Dham in a very special way. And the last Dhamma Parad is to not have faith and to think that the glories of Sri Dham are imaginary. So many of them are connected to Nama Parat, but in this case applied to Sri Dham, which are, it's all this goes hand by hand, Nam, Dham, and so on. So some words, of course, we can speak much more in detail about the experience of visiting the Dham, how to behave, details, but generally speaking, that's the main things to consider for those who plan to go on parikram pilgrimage. Let me go to another topic. We will be switching to different ideas today. So similarly, as what we spoke last class on Prashad, as an extension of Bhagavan's mercy, also some brief words regarding Lakshmi, what we call Lakshmi, which sometimes called money, which is a Shakti of Bhagavan. We call Lakshmi because Lakshmi is a Shakti of Narayan, or we can say Lakshmi is the name originally for Radha, the original Lakshmi. So she's Purna Shakti, Adi Shakti of Sri Krishna. So how to deal with that Lakshmi? Administration, if you will. Lakshmi is called Chanchala, interestingly, in the scripture. Chanchala means like restless, who does not stay too much in any place. So Lakshmi means, with the exception in the case of Lakshmi Devi by Kuntha, she's fixed on Narayan's feet, serving, massaging Narayan's feet. But apart from that, she's not fixed anywhere else. So the point is regarding money, what we consider money, that won't stay too long in anyone's pocket. It will be here today, gone tomorrow, and maybe making full circle, coming back again to you and get going there. And generally, money in this world is a big problem, especially for those who want to keep it. But it's a problem in every single stage generally. How to get the money, how to keep the money, how to spend the money properly. So all of these stages generally create some sense of anxiety. And it's important to know how to deal with that because it's a Shakti, it's a powerful thing. As we know in the Bhagavatam, what we call the four regulative principles, and we will speak a little bit about that later, has to do with avoiding the four places of residence of Kali. As we know in the Bhagavatam, this idea is there, the personification of Kali as Parikshit Maharaj places to reside, and he said there will be gambling and killing of animals and intoxication, illicit sex. Those are your places. Any other place? He says, Parikshit said, that place where there's excessive accumulation of money, of gold, he will say, we can extend that to money. So it's important, this point, that's the idea of, if you are not dealing properly with money, that can become an embassy of Kali, basically. So knowing how to deal with money is an important point for us as Gaudias. It's not just, it's part of our Yukta Vairagya. Of course, with proper attitude. And there's a famous story once Srila Siddhar Maharaj was given Harikatha, very deep Harikatha, absorbed in that, and all the devotees were there. I think my Guru Maharaj was there as well. They were hearing Srila Siddhar Maharaj really absorbed in particular mood, as you may imagine. And suddenly, one brahmachari from the mat, like kind of interrupts for a minute Srila Siddhar Maharaj and says something to him. And Srila Siddhar Maharaj like takes one little box back in his bag, something like that, and takes some rupees, some money from that, and gives that to the brahmachari. And the brahmachari goes. So the devotees were like, kind of asked Srila Siddhar Maharaj, but Guru Maharaj, I mean, why you are doing the treasury work here? I mean, someone else can do that. You are the acharya of the mission, and you are giving a lecture, and you have to be interrupted by one devotee who is asking you some money. And Srila Siddhar Maharaj said, no. This administration is a highest service, he said. This is a personal service of Sri Radha. She's administrating everything in Vrindavan for the service of Krishna. So not everyone can do that. That's a very high service. And again, Sri Radha is the original Lakshmi. So it's rendering service to her, knowing how to properly manage and spend money. So it's an interesting conception, again, because generally we can see that as very ordinary stuff. So the point is, we should be very careful that everything that is energy of Krishna, which basically is everything, is properly engaged, properly used, at least those things that come in our path. And of course, a good way of doing that is using that money. If you have some money, of course, you have to sustain your life. And hopefully, if you've used the money to sustain your life, you are sustaining your life in the context of bhakti, because what's the purpose of sustaining your life without that, according to our tradition, basically? I mean, it's just to maintain the body, to survive. That's not the goal of life. And if you have some extra money, if you will, that's important also, interesting point to know how to invest that in the proper direction. For example, use part of our income to support the Guru's mission. Again, as we always say, it's not that God needs your money, but we need to give God our money, because we are attached generally to our pocket. And the story I shared once, someone asked one devotee, are you interested in my heart or in my money? And the devotee said, both of them, because your heart is in your pocket. So he said, are you interested in my heart or in my pocket? Sorry. So he said, in both. I mean, mainly in your heart, but since your heart is in your pocket, I'm interested in your pocket. So by giving our pocket means we are giving part of our heart. If we are doing that properly, this is not a forced action. Nobody will force us in that direction, but it should be a natural conclusion. Money means the result of certain work, certain energy, where we invested ourselves, and lots of identification is there in that direction. So if we are identified with the service of Sri Guru, naturally, that part of our identity very happily will go in that direction. And of course, that will Krishna will make all arrangements for us to sustain ourselves. That's a famous example of Professor Sanyal. I think I shared that the disciple of Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, he was Grihasta, and when he received his monthly income, he went and gave everything to Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, everything. He went empty pocket to his house. And Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta will divide that and send back some money to Professor Sanyal for him to survive, because if not, he will give everything to Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta. So these are nice examples to conceive how to deal with this. And for example, if I'm speaking, if we are given a dakshina, for example, what we call a donation, or some monthly collaboration for Sri Guru's projects, or for the Guru Seva, of his travels, of the printing of the book, the sustaining of the temple, so many things. The consciousness behind that is not I'm giving something mine. And the one who is receiving the dakshina will be, I'm not receiving something for me. You follow? This is not to be done from a separate sense of existence. Actually, ideally, at least ideally, and I know this is not easy, and with money, so many problems, maybe there are even in spiritual societies, but we should know how to deal with that. The ideal is both parties, the one who is giving and the one who is receiving, both will feel we are sevakas, we are just exchanging energy, which is destined to the service of our lords, our prabhus. By giving, I'm serving my Prabhu. By receiving, I'm serving my Prabhu, my master. Basically, that's the point. It's not that I'm giving from my thing separate to you and I'm receiving for me. That is fostering false ego, basically, separate sense of self. And in that connection, it comes to mind this idea that I was invited to speak a little bit about that also, of Srila Siddhar Maharaj, that I liked a lot. There's a brief excerpt of one lecture of him, what it is called Beyond Gratitude. It's one of my favorites. You can find that in the Harmonist. And he speaks there how he doesn't like too much the word thank you. And you will find that not only in Srila Siddhar Maharaj, also in one level of my Guru Maharaj and other sadhus. In India especially, they won't use too much the expression thank you. And it's important to understand why. I mean, I'm not promoting being ungrateful, but Srila Siddhar Maharaj once said, both say, thank you, Guru Maharaj. And he said, I don't like this word very much, because to thank means to, he said, to thank means to express gratefulness. So he says, then it presupposes, like dana means gift. This idea presupposes that one is an owner or proprietor of something, and taking presupposes the existence of a second party. I have something, and you are taking that, thanking what you are giving to me. So we are a second party. Srila Siddhar Maharaj suppose like this: I'm a separate party. I have got something, and in return, I express my gratefulness. And Srila Siddhar Maharaj will say, but are you a separate party? I mean, actually, we are all one party. We all belong to the party of Mahaprabhu, Gaur Paribar. So in that sense, we have to get the gist of that. Again, do not go neurotic if you say thank you to someone. But it's a very fine point, which is very interesting. Of course, on top of being ungrateful, we have to be grateful. But on top of that, we have this conception that there are no separate party. Thank you and other expressions of gratitude. In this sense, Srila Siddhar Maharaj will say, do not make a good impression in my heart, he says. So again, the point is not be careful with being ungrateful in the name of going beyond gratitude, because that can happen also. I'm just beyond gratitude. I do not say thank you to anyone, but you also do not have the notion we are the same party. So it's important to be grateful, but that in the context of and understanding there is something beyond that, where all of us belong to the same thing, and we are so intimately connected that we don't find a separate sense of giving, receiving. The concept of pranaya is very much in that line. Pranaya means me, I, and my friend or my love are so much together in love, so much one in the ideal, that you and I, as my Guru Maharaj will say, have become we. So there's no separate sense of existence. So in that sense, the thank you is basically creating some unnecessary distance there. So that's a nice way to to also appreciate this conception in the context of receiving a dakshin or whatever interaction. But again, not to abuse the idea. What else? Some words regarding also regulate principles in connection to all the things that we have been speaking about money and keeping money and blah, blah, blah. Of course, again, I'm being brief on this. Each one of these points deserves a separate addressing, separate lecture. But some words, we have already shared some words, but we will share some brief ones. Regulative, the famous regulative principles sometimes that Srila Prabhupada established when he was giving initiation, which are taken again from this section of the Bhagavatam that I mentioned, which has mostly to do with human life, becoming humans, stop being animals, if you will, getting closer to a sattvic lifestyle. There are pillars of Dharma in the Bhagavad. So you have to do with Dharma, not necessarily with Bhakti. I mean, you can follow all of them and be an atheistic person, basically. You can be vegetarian, you can be, do not take any intoxication, do not go to the casino, etc. Also, it's important to know that Prabhupada established that, and his disciples, most of them followed that, but not necessarily every acharya will ask those 4 principles when giving Harinam or Diksha. So we should not also not over absolutize them, because I've seen that devotees go neurotic because they're having difficulty in following one principle and thinking, I cannot be a devotee in this lifetime because I have some problems with smoking pot or whatever. And of course, this is not to make that cheap. Oh, no problem. You can smoke pot. You can still be a devotee. I mean, you can still be a devotee, but not taking that as an excuse. And I continue doing so many other things. So bhakti is more powerful than any other thing, but papa and so on. So we have to have faith in bhakti, and whatever problem we have gradually will be accommodated. But again, beyond these 4 regulative principles, we could also speak, as sometimes they say, the 4 regulative principles, not so much of human life, but of bhakti, which Mahaprabhu gives in the 3rd verse of Sikshastakam. Sunichena Sahishnu Namani Namanadena. These are other 4 pillars for our chanting of Srinam. So we have these 2. Regarding the 4 regulative principles that Srila Prabhupada mainly established based on the Bhagavad, they are not so much about don'ts, but do's. It's not so much about do not intoxicate, do not eat meat, but be merciful, be clean, be pure, and be austere. Those are these 4 positive values. And again, by engaging in those practices, not eating meat and so on, it's not that by only doing that, I'm fully merciful. That's the point. I'm not merciful only by not eating meat. I can be a fanatical vegan and not be too merciful to human beings. That happens a lot. Or whatever, any other principle. So we have to get the gist of this, is we have to culture these values: austerity, purity, compassion, and truthfulness in the positive sense, understanding this is also a dharmic setting, sattvic setting, that will make the whole stage much more favorable for imbibing bhakti samskars. They are not bhakti in themselves. Of course, if we accept trying to follow them in the context of serving Sri Guru, that's another thing. But again, all these practices should be taken in a sustainable way. One of the classical ones is no illicit sex. So what's illicit sex? Of course, there are so many standards, and Srila Prabhupada have said so many different things to his disciple. For example, only having sex for procreation, having only sex with your wife, having only sex twice a month or whatever, asking permission to your guru before having intercourse. So you can imagine there is some relativity to that. So the general idea is try to, if you have a couple, to engage in that activity in a committed way in that couple, in the concept of that couple, not with many people at the same time and something like that, in the context of a committed relationship, and also understanding the need that gradually transcending that type of activities as well, because most of them have to do with still identifying ourselves as the body and trying to derive some pleasure for that. Of course, eating, sleeping could be also termed in that connection. So that's why as much as we advance, we will be naturally less and less attracted to that. But again, that has to be done in a sustainable way according to our particular situation. Because if not, we may engage in repression. And as we know, Krishna says in the Gita, repression does not work. Repressed desire Actually, if you repress your desire, will come in a redoubled force later, or in some perverted manner as well. So that can happen. And Krishna in the Gita or in the Bhagavatam also, even in the 11th canto, say he allowed sense pleasure that is not forbidden, again, in a certain particular context. Krishna in the Gita say, I'm in the sexual relationship which is not against the principles of religion. So there is a place for that, dharma, artha, kama, but moksha and prem, pancham purushartha. Of course, there are some days in the concept of sexual interaction that are ideally to be avoided. If the ladies during her menstrual period, or in Ekadasi, in Purnim, ideally some holidays like we were having these days. And again, the point is, desire for sex arises mainly because of our innate desire for existence as individuals and as community, by identifying ourselves with the body, mind complex, and we have fear, and we desire to stay alive. But as we identify as eternal servants of Sri Guru, those desires will gradually dissipate. But again, it has to be a natural thing that will come as a byproduct of our positive devotional culture. And the same with this other principle. For example, truthfulness actually means do not be a hypocrite. It's not just do not go to the casino. Do not cheat. Do not cheat others. Do not cheat yourself. Be satam. Be truthful. Be a sadhu, basically. Non-intoxication, as we spoke the other day. You can speak about gossip. That's a form of intoxication. Overdose of social media. Intoxication is not only limited to a particular type of activity. So how to properly use social media? I remember once Guru Nista made one comic that was the Guru was giving Harinam or initiation to disciple, and was repeating the sure that you have to pronounce it regulative principle, and they said, and no Facebook. And the face of the disciple was like going mad. I'm like, no, please reject my initiation immediately. You're asking too much. Like implying this idea. Now we should consider the natural extended expression and implication of this concept of four regulative principle to whatever is of consequence in our nowadays dynamics. So some ideas regarding four regulative principles and how they can be misrepresented, misinterpreted. And also, I would like to share briefly some ideas in the same way that we can misinterpret four regulative principles. There are some terms, Sanskrit terms, devotional terms on a daily basis that we may use wrongly. So I think it's, again, not to go extremely technical, and Krishna is Bhavagrahi Janardana, takes the essence of our mood, attitude, but if you have proper attitude, you will want to do things nicely and properly as well. So for example, some terms that sometimes we may, in our internal ruminating of that term, may be distorted. For example, the term Sankirtan. Sankirtan, of course, technically speaking, as we spoke already, refers to the congregational chanting of Sri Hari's name. And that means not only quantity, but quality. And sometimes, of course, in time, after Prabhupada, even Prabhupada himself didn't speak about Sankirtan in terms of book distribution. He will say book distribution, but at one point that came to be known as Sankirtan, following the concept of Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta and the printing press, the Brihad Mridanga and Kirtan, and Harikatha is a form of Kirtan, and distribution of books is Kirtan and Sankirtan. It's okay. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, as much as we do not forget what's the, if you will, original meaning. Because if not in time, the idea may get more and more diluted. I've seen devotees speaking in terms, okay, book distribution in Sankirtan, or sometimes they start to dilute that more, like collecting money is Sankirtan. Yes, if you have the proper attitude, that will be Sankirtan, as we spoke about Lakshmi. But sometimes I've heard devotees asking, how was your Sankirtan today? And the other will say, $30. So my point is, sometimes the danger is there. We can just limit the concept to what we have in the pocket. And Sankirtan has so many implications and considerations there. So that's my point when it's mentioning such term. But sometimes also we say we go out for Harinam, but strictly speaking, to go to chant out in the streets, that sometimes that's called Harinam. Actually, it's called Nagar Sankirtan. Nagar Sankirtan, which means congregational chanting in the streets. Because Harinam means basically the name of Kari. So if I go for Harinam, means I go for the name of Kari. And yes, that's a fact. but the technical explanation is Nagar Sankirtan. Because Harinam is the name of Hari, that is when sometimes devotees speak about first initiation or second initiation. Actually, the technical term is Harinam and then Diksha, which is initiation proper. What else? We also share sometimes devotees thinking in terms, black and white terms. That's an important thing, not to all limit your expression of people as karmi and asura, for example, and devotee. No. They are saintly, they are devotees. Now they are initiated, they are devotees. Before yesterday, they were karmis, asuras. No, they are gray between black and white. Or the term bhakta, sometimes bhakta, it has to be used for those newcomers who are just visiting the temple the first time, or the first weeks or years, or are not yet initiated. Newcomer, and after being initiated, you feel, oh, now I'm a devotee. Before I was a bhakta. But actually, the word bhakta means devotee. Mahaprabhu is Bhakta avatar. The word Bhakta is all over Chaitanya Charitamrita, referring to great devotees. So to be a Bhakta is not a little thing. That's an important point, as I mentioned. So Bhakta is not referring to a newcomer. Bhakta means someone who has Bhakti. What else? The bag, when we have the japa beads, it's called Malika. So when we say, give me the japa, actually, japa refers to the chanting, to the type of chanting, not to the mala itself, to the garland of beads. That's called malika. The bead, the japa mala, and malika is the bead bag. But japa means the type of chanting, not the rosary in itself. Because sometimes they would have say, give me my japa. But japa refers to the chanting, not to the garland in itself, if you will. Sometimes the devotees also have spoken in terms of kirtan and bhajan, like kirtan being jumping and rolling on the floor and jumping in the air, and bhajan is just sitting there and chanting, basically seated quietly. But actually, in one sense, both are kirtan. If you're singing seated, that's kirtan also. It doesn't mean you have to be jumping or dancing. You can be sit quietly and singing, and that's a form of kirtan. And bhajan sometimes is connected to the quiet chanting, but ultimately bhajan refers to what we sometimes say, your life of bhajan. How is your bhajan doing? How is your devotional worship? We found this term in the famous stages of bhakti, bhajan and kriya, which means devotional activities, basically. So bhajan. Since we say bhajan, also important to conceive anartha nibriti, the next stage that is mentioned. Anartha nibriti in itself is not a practice. It's not that I will engage in anartha nibriti. Anartha nibriti is not a process, which is cleaning of anarthas, but it's the result of engaging in bhajana kriya. It's a byproduct of bhajana kriya. So it's important to get attached to this positive conception. I engage in devotional practice, and the result of that will be cleansing of the heart on one level. Some other idea, and there are many more, I'm just mentioning some that come to mind. To do sadhana, sometimes devotees understand the idea of sadhana just like waking up in the morning and assisting the morning program, something like that. And then I'll do service. I already did my sadhana, now comes the service, as if the two terms will be different. But actually, ideally, whatever I'm doing from morning to night is sadhana. It's part of my life of practice, and service will be another way of translating that, seva. Of course, sometimes we may see practical services and other things, but basically, we are referring to the same thing. And something else that I think Dulal Chandra spoke recently about that is that a devotee who studies, who has some intellectual affinity, capacity, and tries to engage that in the context of Shravan and hearing Shastra, studying Shastra, that person is not a jnani. Sometimes I've heard that, oh, he's a jnani. Actually, he's not a jnani. You are an aparadi by saying that. If a devotee in the proper sense is trying to engage her intellect in the study of Shastra, that's not Gyan, that's Bhakti. That's Bhakti. Actually, to read Shastra means Shravan. It's a form of to connect, to hear printed sounds. To engage in Shravan is Swarup Siddha Bhakti, one of the main angas of Bhakti. So why to call a person a Jnani? So again, these are terms, but sometimes they may take us to misunderstand some important points and so on. So again, the list is long, but I will prefer to stop this particular list here. I have some few topics that I would like to share with you tomorrow, if possible. Maybe I may extend some few minutes today with your permission. Also, on another point, some words about Tulasi, Tulasi Seva, which is, as we know, Tulasi Devi's Brinda Devi, originally in Vrindavan, appearing as a Dutika, as a messenger, as a gopi who is engaged of making all the arrangements and preparing all the settings for the Lila of Radha and Krishna, really considered very in connection to the Bhakti Shakti principle, who appears by Kunthan in this world as well as Tulasi, as a sacred basil plant that daily we worship as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, whether in its form as a plant, as a picture. So in case you have a Tulsi plant at home, again, this may be made in a whole separate seminar, but ideally Tulsi plant, if you have it closer to the altar, it should be on the left side of the altar, which will be our right side if we are looking at the altar. And there are different, of course, mantras that we may recite to according to how we are approaching Tulsi and serving her. For example, of course, when we offer pranam to her, we will recite famous verse, Vrindayai Tulasi Devi Priyai Kisabasacha Krishna Bhakti Pradidevi Satyabhakti Namo Namaha. When we offer pranam over and over again to Srimati Tulsi Devi, also known as Brinda, or also Satyabhati, who is very dear to Sri Hari, and who bestows Bhakti, Krishna Bhakti. Regarding taking some of the leaves of Tulsi with the intention of using them in the service of Bhagavan for the offerings, that's the idea, of course. We shouldn't be taking leaves of Tulsi without any other motive. And for taking those leaves or manjaris from Tulsi, ideally one should be first bathed and ask permission to Srimati Tulsi Maharani, and be very careful in not creating unnecessary harm by doing that service. So the leaves and the manjaris should be taken one after the other, not many at the same time, but in a very meditative state with the right hand, very carefully, and with your left hand, ideally, you are sustaining the respective branch, so you are not breaking the whole thing when trying to take one leaf. Ideally, you shouldn't be using like a knife or scissors to cut the leaves. Ideally, you should be barefoot. Again, you are dealing with a deity, basically. Also, it is said that it's not allowed to take tulsi leaves on Dwadasi, or ideally as the sun has not gone out. And even if the tulsi leaves have dried, that happens, or have been picked from previous days, all of them can be used, worshipped, and offerings, and so on. There are some other mantras that can be recited, of course, while taking different leaves or tulasi, or after finishing the taking the leaves, well, or some mantras for begging forgiveness to tulasi for any possible offense one may have committed, or there are also some mantras that one can recite when bathing tulasi, when watering it. I won't be sharing all of them here now, it's maybe too much, but if someone is interested in that, you can send me some private message and I can share them with you. And Tulasi also something to know, because sometimes devotees get neurotic when Tulasi is passing away, if you will, leaving the body. We should know that generally Tulasi is a yearly plant. So generally in the winter, most of them die, to be realistic, and hardly any plant survives. There are some exceptions, of course, but we will try our best in that direction. But again, in that case, one have to plant it again. It's not like a tree. Very rarely does it survive 2 years. So it's not offense if Tulasi pass away, because you can start to get overtly paranoid in that direction as well. Oh, she must have died because of something I did. I mean, if you really did something, okay, you may connect that and learn the lesson and continue, but not to unnecessary neurosis there. And when Tulasi dies, quote unquote, dies, what should, sometimes we may ask, what shall we do with her? And generally say you can put Tulasi on the water, or in a river, or in a lake, or sometimes you can use the wood for making beads, as we have our beads made for Tulasi. Also, sometimes the question is, as Vaishnavas, do we take Ayurvedic medicines that contain Tulasi? That can happen. There are some of them. So ideally, better to avoid them, unless there is no other alternative, for sure. I mean, we have to remain practical, but as much as we can avoid, we will avoid that. So some considerations on practical consideration on Tulasi Tattva, basically. So let me close today's meeting before making some brief conclusion with one more topic that somehow or other I mentioned that briefly on our, I think, second lecture when we spoke about Vaishnava culture. But I would like to share some brief words on Vaishnava dress, which again was something implied in our class on Vedic culture. And as we always have said, no, for sure we may adjust our clothes due to relative circumstance or due to personal taste in this life and identification with a particular strand, fashion, and time of world history. But the point is, we should also at the same time be careful as Gaudiya Vaishnavas not to reach the point to say clothing is totally relative, and therefore it doesn't matter if you don't use any type of devotional clothes. It's just a relative issue. It's not essential to our practice. That's not the fact. Actually, clothes can be an udipana also, can be an stimulant for our practice. We mentioned in our second class that in the Nitya Lila, both in Braj and in Nadia, there is a particular culture. In both Lilas, they follow Vedic culture. So it's, even though we may on one level say Vedic culture is relative about Vedic Varna Ashram, we have Prem Bhakti, yes, but when you reach the converging point of the Lila, you see that in the realm of Lila, Varna Ashram is part of the social system there. In the context of the Lila, it plays itself out in that context. So there are cultural sensibilities that will be part of our eternal life in both Lilas. And there's a certain clothing. And that's why, therefore, as sadhakas, there is some devotional clothing that is recommended that will be connected with the clothing that we'll be using in the Lila. So in that sense, that may become an udipana. So in following that criteria, we could say whatever, dhoti or whatever devotional clothes we are using, gopi dress, in one sense that's fully spiritual because you will be using that eternally in your spiritual body. Bhagavan himself is wearing that. We have to remember we are part of Raganuga, Ragamarg. Raganuga Bhakti, what does it mean, Raganuga? Raganuga means following Ragadmika. Ragadmika means those eternal associates of Bhagavan who are made of Raga. So Raganuga means to follow in the footsteps of those personalities. And all these Nitya Siddha Ragatmikas, they wore dhoti. Krishna Lila, Gaur Lila, especially we're connecting Gaur Lila with our particular sadhaka experience. So there, my point is there is a place for that. With this, I'm not saying you have to be with dhoti every day long, go to the work, and I understand there are circumstances, but we have to develop some taste for that because you will be using that for eternity. We won't have jeans and baseball caps in Golok Vrindavan or something like that. We know that Putana was delivered in grand part by the dress she was having. She was dressing as a Vaishnavi. Of course, again, this is not an excuse. I will put the dhoti and I'm already saved. But there is a point for that. Again, Krishna lives eternally in a particular cultural framework, and we are to embrace that eventually if we want to enter there. We remember Uddhav always mentioning, by wearing the clothes of Bhagavan, by dressing with his remnants, by eating his remnants of foodstuff, I will conquer Maya. We, our servants, he speaks in plural, will conquer your Maya. So there's a place for honoring properly devotional clothes that will be first offering to Bhagavan, who has been used by other Vaishnavas in the context of bhakti. So as I mentioned, all these paradigmatic figures of Raga Bhakti are described with certain detail in the scripture. And again, they are like the object of our affection. And those descriptions of different associates are empowered and should be employed in our meditation, in our visualization. It's not that we can replace, I don't know, Krishna herding cows and wearing pitambar, yellow cloth, with Krishna again, wearing jeans and riding a mountain bike and expect the same result in our practice of meditation. No, there's a particular way in which the Lila expresses itself, and clothes is part of that. This is the very implication of the famous verse of Rupa Goswami when he describes, when he said, describes Raga Nuga Bhakti saying, Seva sadhaka rupena siddha rupena chatrahe, tat bhava lipsuna karya Rajalukanushatara. When he says, once both in your seva, sadhaka rupa and your siddha rupa, you are to follow the inhabitants of Raj. So that in part means in your sadhaka, you dress yourself after the examples of the siddhas in Golok, Nadia, in this case, as sadhakas, as they appear in Gaur Lila. So again, one will also appear there in due course. And these things are favorable. For example, I'm not only limiting that discussion to clothes in itself. We can speak about tilak. We spoke already about tilak, tulsi, kantimala, and so on. And so dress, tilak, tulsi, neck beads, all these actually are considered, among other things, by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Raga Varma Chandrika. He considers them bhava anukul, swabhishta bhava anukul, which means they are favorable items in connection to the desired mood that one is cherishing in the context of Raga Bhakti. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also wrote about that in his Saranagati songs with regard to that, though anukul yas sankalpa, making a firm vow of accepting that which is favorable for bhakti, for Raga Bhakti. He will say, Gaura Bhagata Priya Besha, Dadana Tilaka Tulasi Mala Shobhamana. So you say Besha. Besha means clothing. So Bhakti Vinod, in his own affirmation of what he's accepting as favorable, he says, I will put on the garb that is dear to the devotees of Sri Gaur Sundar, including the 12 Vaishnava tilak markings of my body and beautiful beads of tulsi wood around my neck. So he's like accepting, taking a vow in that connection. That's included, Besh. So it's important to understand this is not some artificial imposition. It should be a natural, irresistible call, clarion call for us. Now, once my Guru Maharaj mentioned that in that regard, this point, he said, try to enter the feeling of Vrindavan Das. And he quotes one verse from Chaitanya Bhagavat. Kiva Shri Adbhuta Dui Kamala Nayan, Kiva Shri Adbhuta Shobhe Trikachavasan. Vrindavan Das, he says, how wonderful were his two lotus eyes, Mahaprabhu's two lotus eyes, and how wonderful was the way he wore his dhoti. So our Guru Maharaj is saying, try to enter the feeling of Vrindavan Das mood while saying that. So here he speaks trikacha, which means a dhoti that is worn, more put in a particular way. The commentary here is that when the left end of the dhoti is taken between the legs and tucked at it on the back, it's called kacha. When the other end is tucked at the navel, it's called concha. And when the other end of this concha is tucked at the navel, is then called trikacha. So my Guru Maharaj, he said in this connection, my thought is that if you are worshipping Mahaprabhu and feeling like Vrindavan Das, that's our goal, not like he's feeling here. Is it this not a sign of one's love for Mahaprabhu to idealize dressing like him and participating in his lila? So again, we should learn how to really make these points part of our passion, if you will, part of our prospect, not just thinking, oh, I have to do this, this is the rule, but they are inviting me to a world of Bhav. I mean, these daughters will be made of Bhav there. For example, also in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam, interestingly, all the clothes and ornaments of Krishna are described as symbolizing something. Even the clothes, the Kaustuba gem, as you know, is all the jivas, and different items, ornaments, and clothes of Bhagavan represent something. So how can we call that only a local custom, a temporary custom, without, strictly speaking, engaging in a form of Mayavad? Because we are relativizing the absolute identity of all these items, which are actually personalities. And of course, there is some example sometimes it's given of when Sanatana Goswami was dressing as a fakir. And we know that Mahaprabhu at that point, he asked him, change your clothes and dress as a Vaishnava. So I think that will be enough to silence all significant doubts that clothing is not inconsequential. And Sanatana appeared as a fakir because he was traveling and had long beard and dress and certain clothes. So Mahaprabhu said, please shave yourself and dress as a Vaishnava. So again, clothing is not inconsequential, although of course we don't want to overemphasize it as well to the point that someone may feel discouraged, overwhelmed, or whatever. But again, there is a place for that. One Srila Prabhupada some brief words to close this topic. One Srila Prabhupada said that the saffron robes and the shaven head are not essential to balance all this. Although, he said, they create a good mental situation. Just, and he gives a good analogy, just as when a military man is dressed properly, he gets energy when he puts the uniform. He will feel himself like a military man. Does that mean that unless he's in uniform, he cannot fight? No, we know that's not the fact. So in the same way, God consciousness is not something that can be checked and limited. It can be expressed in any circumstance, but at the same time, Prabhupada says certain conditions are helpful. And we know that Prabhupada himself preferred that his disciples not only think of Krishna as he is described in the text, but also to dress in ways reminiscent of Gaur Lila when possible, as an aid to their culture of Krishna consciousness. But again, of course, when speaking to devotees from the West who felt uncomfortable with such dress, he replied to them in the broadest of terms. And of course, there were some exceptions. Devotees were dressing with secular clothes, were distributing books in the airport, and so on. And sometimes nowadays, of course, we may also have to work on these certain social dynamics in that connection. But again, this is not just Indian culture, as we mentioned in the second class. It has to do with the eternal culture that surrounds the lila. And sometimes devotees may say nowadays, push this idea, no, we have to dress with Western clothes because if we want to speak to the modern culture in the West, we have to approach them in their own terms. If we look weird for them with Eastern devotional clothes, that won't be good for our dissemination of the message. I mean, on one level, we can say that in certain cases, but also we can say the opposite as well. Once I remember my Guru Maharaj mentioned something like that. He said, like, my experiences with dressing is that dressing like a monk actually is attracted to a large portion of the Western public, and he himself does on a daily basis. He says, well, it certainly has not hurt the Dalai Lama's outreach. And of course, that can extend to so many others. Because after all, he will say that the progressive West, interestingly, has promoted multiculturalism for decades already. And so there is room in the minds of many for the exotic and honoring, if not seeking to identify, at least in terms of intellectual curiosity with other cultures. So we live now in a multicultural world. So everything is part of everything, if you will. And again, there is some relativity to that. No? An interesting point in this connection, for example, is on one particular time, Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, they became outcasts by being grihastas working for the Muslim government. Yeah, they worked for another government, they were kicked out from the social system. Whereas some centuries after that, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a very respected preaching platform by being a grihasta working for the British government. Do you follow? So depending on what is unfavorable culturally at one time and place may become favorable culturally at another time and place. So there's lots of relativity to it. So we need to accommodate that and be mature enough to deal with that properly. So again, many more things we could say regarding dress. We share some ideas in, again, our second class in Vedic culture. And I would like just to close this meeting and this series with some brief words in conclusion, trying to make some full circle regarding what we mentioned at the very beginning, how all these rules, again, the subtitle of the series is Rules and Love in the Life of the Sadhaka. So this is not some military commandment that we have to follow blindly or cold-hearted way, but this comes from the wish, the desire, as we mentioned in the very first class. I want to please the object of my affection. So whatever is his, her taste, whatever he considers best for me, I will follow that with that feeling, not a cold feeling, irrational, blind, nonsensical feeling. Vaisnava etiquette, also called Maryad, as we mentioned, actually includes a long list of rules that we have seen in all these almost 20 meetings, but the rules are there to promote the feeling, as we say, when the feeling is there, sometimes we may even not follow certain rules, not because we don't want, but we can't because the feeling is too overwhelming. And sometimes we follow rules, and those who have followed the rules are the ones who can break the rules in order to accept a higher rule. So these rules are there to promote the feeling. So we are to conceive those rules properly. So hopefully we were able to do that. And hopefully these rules that we have been sharing, these advices I will share, I will say, made common sense for most of you, and are quite intuitive, at least in the most part. So, and Vaishnava etiquette, again, let's bear this in mind, is all about relationships, how to relate properly with personalities, with the sacredness in everything, sacred people, sacred items, and a relationship will be established, as we mentioned, not only with people, but with things as well. And we have to learn certain sambandha to properly have proper regard to those items, personalities, to perceive the sacredness in them, become expert in those interactions, relationships, proper regard for the sacredness in our daily life, in our process, how to conceive and relate, again, to sacred places, items, people, learn to appreciate sacredness everywhere, basically all around us. And this has been a brief, if you will, portal into the world of Vaishnava etiquette. This is full of details, and as we mentioned, spiritual life is full of details. It's all about details. Details are not necessarily something relative or secondary, but maybe the thing that make the whole difference. Because we are in the raga mark again, and the idea is to render anukul seva, favorable service, in the context of raga mark. And raga mark is the path of specificity, as we mentioned. It's a very specific path, very specific goal, very specific type of love, very specific mood and istadev. Everything is very detailed. That's the point. So the whole raga mark, the whole path we belong, is full of specificity. So we should be as specific as members of that path. We should pay close attention to detail. And Raga Nuga, again, Raga Nuga is based on love. When I love someone, I naturally want to please that person, and I want to avoid those things that will displease him or her. In the concept of guru, the sadhu. So that's the main point that will inspire us to follow Vaishnava etiquette. It's not so much I must, but I want, I feel this. So many things have been shared, and we should, I think, sometimes hear and rehear these points over and over again, so they gradually become part of our, naturally, again, in a natural way, and with our own will, positive will there, they become part of our life. They become a habit in our life. Remember, first you have the samskar, you receive the impressions. A certain quantity of impressions become some habit on a daily basis, and a certain number of habits put together in time, they create a new identity. So the idea is that we are in this project of creating a new identity, Bhakta Abhiman, the identity of a Sevaka. So the idea is to make this Vaishnava etiquette, this series of lectures, into a lifestyle. This is not just classes, but it has the potential to become a lifestyle. Again, samskars, habits, identity, and that means lifestyle. And that lifestyle will be fully embellishing, decorating our own life as a sadhaka. Remember, Maryat, this is shloka from Chaitanya Charitamrita, we will say, Sadhura Bhushan. The sadhu devotee will be very keen on following Maryat, Vaishnava etiquette. And by doing that, the very following of Vaishnava etiquette is Sadhura Bhushan, is an ornament of the sadhu. The sadhu become beautified. So let's increase our devotional beauty by further embracing Vaishnava etiquette from the proper place with the proper attitudes, and this way embracing rules in the context of developing love in our sadhaka project. So at the beginning of the lecture, I say I won't say thank you. We have to go beyond gratitude, but I will break the rule for a moment, and I want to express my gratitude in one sense to all of you for being part of this series, who follow enthusiastically and tolerated so many months of myself speaking on this. So I have full confidence that you will try to embrace this in the most healthy and dynamic way. And of course, whatever doubt, question, something may come on the way in this connection, we can always continue thinking and elaborating on this. So I pranam to all, and of course, if there are any questions, we may have some few minutes. So let me activate the option to unmute, just in case someone may like to share something. There it is. So I don't know if there are any questions.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, it's Kanuram here.
Jai Kanuram.
Jai Maharaj, you'll forgive my breach of etiquette. Thank you very much for all these nice classes. So I have a specific question. I guess I have two questions. So I got some Kuntimala, Radhakund clay beads from Karnamrita Prabhu yesterday. And these clay beads from Radhakund, can you tell me something about them? Is that something that I should wear? Or is that something that I should have a more worshipful attitude about?
They are the ones you have put now, or there are somewhere you have them with you on another place?
They're in the house.
Ah, okay. So there are beads made of Radhakunda clay.
Yes.
Wow, I never heard about that one. Of course, Radhakunda is quite famous for having lots of Kantimalas and Japamalas being made there and being sold there in the area, but I never heard of course I know about Tilak, Radhakund Tilak, I have it, but having beads of Radhakunda mud, I mean, I never heard about that. And I may have to do some research, but I don't think you should wear them because I mean they will disappear in a few moments because it's mud. So it's like tilak. In time they will become more and more dismantled. So you can, I mean, have them. I mean, they are with some string in between or something.
Yes.
Wow, interesting. I don't know if they have some treatment that they can be preserved while you are using them. If that's the case, that's another thing. But generally, at least in my experience with Radhakund Tilak, which again it may be a different thing. Kanaram is going to look for the beads, it seems.
Yes.
If it's,
I want to show you.
Yeah,
Give you some darshan.
Okay, thank you. Pranamrita Prabhu ki jai. So yeah, if that particular mud has not been treated in a certain way, I think that will really dissolve very soon. So I don't think that's the most becoming thing, just to wear that and after some days it just disappeared, no? But if that's with some treatment, of course one can use that for sure.
Maharaj.
Yes, Brigupad.
Dandavat Pranam.
Pranam.
Can I say something?
In that regard?
Yes.
I mean, in any regard, you can say anything, but I was waiting for you to show something. Yes, please, go on.
These kind of beads I have seen, I think I have at home also. It's not the same kind of clay as for Radhakunda Tilak. It has been burnt a little bit, so it's much harder. And they're very black, completely black. But they do not keep for a very long time. So usually what devotees do is they will wear them during japa or maybe during puja or something like that. So you put them on for some time and then you take them off after that. So not to wear them while eating or going to the shower or something like that.
Okay.
There's also another thing that devotees sometimes get in Radhakund, and that's called a I forget the name now, but it's a kind of mala with 5 different types, 5 different malas. Maybe it's just called a pancha mala. 5 different malas then bound together in cloth from Lord Jagannath.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like it's big, like thick like this, more or less, and usually orange.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something that Babajis especially will wear while doing japa, and it's 5 different types of malas inside. So I think this Radhakunda mala is worn in the same way, that while doing the bhajana.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So thank you for the contribution, Pregup. I think you have there the answer, Kanuram.
Thank you both.
Now, please. Thank you. I think there's one question on the Facebook streaming from Kriparam from Colombia. He's asking, when exposing the philosophy, presenting the philosophy, should we change the term illicit sex for another concept? Well, you can do so if you want, for sure. I personally will choose to use some other term because or at least if you use the term, you should explain it, because that's a problem sometimes. You may be using a term that it's okay, but if you are not making it clear what's the meaning of the term, it may be okay for you, but not for others. And every single person will have a very different idea of the same single word, because what's illicit, basically, and especially if you put the word illicit next to the word sex, I don't think that will be very popular nowadays for the audience. I mean, I wouldn't want to be popular also. I want to just say something that people is happy with us, and we just twist the whole philosophy. But I think there are better ways that we may share the expression, and maybe you don't have to just say everything in one single word or two. As I mentioned, you may say you can have sex in a committed relationship, if we will, which basically is conveying the gist of the same idea that we say no illicit sex. I personally do not like too much to speak in negative terms. I mean, I understand the point for sure, but generally I prefer, again, if I have to speak about the four regulative principles, to emphasize the positive side to it and the virtues, and how those virtues are even beyond those specific practices in itself. So yeah, I think it's important as every member of the Gaudiya community in time, every generation, to really make some rethinking about the terms we are being using and how much they will fit in nowadays language. And we don't need to twist the philosophy, but we may need to edit, if you will, our expression, not only of illicit sex, but of so many other things that may not sound as they sounded 50 years back, because the word changes so quickly, and the application of words as well. That's a whole seminar in itself, but yeah, I will say something like that. Okay, what else? Any other question? Okay, so I think.
Can I ask one more? Can I ask one question, Maharaj?
Brigupad, yeah, for sure.
You spoke about Lakshmi and the importance of using Lakshmi in the correct way. I was thinking about this concept of tithing, or giving 1/10 of one's like netto income. That is very popular among Christian people. Is this something that you think that could be beneficial for devotees as well?
Yes, I think so in general terms, of course. And that has been also relatively applied in the context of my Guru Maharaj's society. I mean, he's not that he's forcing his disciples to tithe, basically, but he's expressing that it will be good for them if they voluntarily agree to do so with the proper understanding. And of course, as much as they can do that, and they're not starving, if you will, by doing that, which generally is not the case. And of course, again, but at the same time, while saying that, we should be so careful, because at least different countries, there may be different situations. Some countries, some devotees may have more money than others, but the principle is, I mean, you are receiving certain results, certain income, and there's always something that one can really dedicate in the direction exclusive directly for the service of Guru and Vaishnavas. And we can be a little bit more austere for the content facilitating that. Again, not to extreme that we are going mad. So personally, I agree with the idea. I was actually thinking about speaking about that when I mentioned the topic. I didn't, but yes, in Christianity they have this 10%. Of course, again, this shouldn't become like a rule in the sense of cold forced thing. Where is your 10% of this month? Where is your other 10%? But ideally will be, they will have Frodo. Frodo was the name? Yeah, I think so. So the idea is, it's not a forced thing, no, that, I feel I have to give, because if not, what will happen? I won't be seen in nice terms. No, it's something that it has to come from your heart. And if it comes from your heart, even if you really are doing that from the proper side, maybe in time you will feel 10% is too little. Again, I'm not saying with this sending some subliminal message to the Grihastha community here, but my point is, if you really want to give your whole life to Bhagavan, of course, you may be keeping some money and living a whole dedicated life to your guru, and whatever you're spending for you, quote unquote, it's not for you because it's in your sadhaka project, but it's easier said than done also. So, I mean, you can speak, yeah, no, I remain at home with my family and all the money and all the house and everything for the service of Krishna. Easier said than done, to be honest, in practice. So the point is, in that situation, it may be good that some part of our income, it goes in that direction, and we try to make efforts and sacrifice and make that nice offering that creates some satisfaction for sure, and we should be sure that there will be nothing lacking for us if we are doing that from the proper side. But again, I don't think that this should be established as a universal rule that everyone has to follow, because if not, you are not a disciple or you are not the and I know many devotees or people have been traumatized with money in previous situations in the context of spirituality, and groups asking money from them. I'm thinking, oh, actually you want my money, you don't want me. And it's subtle, because I can also ask you money for the service of Krishna, but also I have to be properly situated for doing that, because if I'm not properly situated, I may be really exploiting you. So both sides have to be properly situated, the one who is asking the money and the one who will give. If that's not there, that won't be healthy, and that may create a big part of trauma that we see. And I understand that for some devotees, at their particular traumatic moment in that connection, it may be not the best even to ask them tithing of 0.1%. But eventually, if that type of practice is being done from others in a natural way, and the environment is healthy, and I feel when I'm giving my money, it's really in a safe place, and I understand it's being properly used, everyone will get naturally more and more inspired in that direction. And again, this is not something about the guru taking the money and having his private bank account in Switzerland and having a parallel life and doing. It's about all that for service. It's not your money, and it's not for me, if you will. No, if you will. But again, easier said than done, because money is a very powerful energy. So, in the name of using it, asking it, many distortions may come in the way. So that's a subtle thing, but in principle, that's a healthy habit. No? Like in the case of you are a grihasta, you have your money for your house, your family, your quote unquote, but giving that directly to the guru, that part will help to consider the rest of your money also as not yours, as your house or your family as not yours. So that's a healthy thing if done in a healthy way. That's what I will say. I won't try to establish that as a universal rule, but I mentioned it's good, and everyone should try to to properly embrace the conception and engage in that in a healthy way. If that's not healthy, we need still to speak further about that, something like that. But thanks for mentioning the idea, and greetings to Frod over there as well.
Thank you for this very, very nice and balanced answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we will stop here. Thank you so much to all for your time, to patience. And Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Primananda, Haribo.
Sripad Bhakti Pranaya Padmanabh Maharaj ki jai.
Jai. Thank you, Maharaj.
Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.